Hey everybody, it's me, Root Beer, and I'm here with a Rezael deck profile, or deck discussion, as it were. So, I did one of these for Chris Rain, and if you watch that video, you might be under the impression that that was all I was doing for that set, but no, actually, I do play other nations, and I have been jamming Rezael a lot recently, so I've been enjoying that at locals. It's just, by the time I hammered out my list and got comfortable with the deck, set 2 was already on the horizon, and I was just waiting for the set to come out, which, here we are. So, we're gonna do the little deck discussion. If you didn't watch the Chris Rain one, what I'm gonna do is, instead of offering like a set deck profile, I'm gonna go through all of the cards that I would consider options. Some of them are pretty obvious, some of them are really like niche, and some of them are just scraping the bottom of the barrel for budget players. So I'm gonna offer a range of profiles, kind of like the one I'm personally going to be playing, kind of like a mid-budget one, and then a slightly cheaper than that version, which is also why I have all these TCG player tabs open to talk about prices. So, starting with the ride deck, I'm personally just kind of doing the like standard Rezael deck line, so the grade 1 that like pops itself out, and then you soul charge one, the grade 2 like calls a card from the drop zone. A big thing a lot of people change with the ride line is they play this grade 1 Tranquila from set 13. So this was for the Alden ride line. What you do is like, when it's rode upon, you can reveal 3 cards with different grades, look at the top 5 cards, choose a grade 1 or less, call it to rearguard circle, shuffle your deck, and then if you did not call a card, you can call this instead. The main downside with this one compared to the Rezael one, like they both have a similar outcome of like calling a body, although being able to search top 5 means you have a better chance of finding Sergauon if you're going to play it. But you do have to have 3 different grades. Sometimes you will just brick and have a completely useless grade 1. And, if you do whiff the search and you end up calling it, you don't get the soul back like you do with the Rezael grade 1, so that can be a problem. Most people stick with the standard grade 2, because this doesn't have to ride any particular grade 1, it just, when it's rode upon by Rezael, you can choose a grade 2 or less card from drop zone and call it to rearguard circle, and that's just generally good. Again, if you're playing Sergauon, it is something that can just like call Sergauon, pop its effect, and then when you ride to grade 3, just bring the Sergauon back. And then of course we have Rezael, our main man. So, the ride deck, pretty fixed most of the time. It's just the options between like these two. I'm playing the Rezael grade 1 personally just because I don't have this card, and despite opening a few packs of set 13, still have not actually found this card. Yay. So yeah, let's talk about our main deck options. So Rezael's gimmick is that you can revive cards from the drop zone. However, you have to revive different grades. So it is worthwhile playing kind of a spread of grades. The big one is Gigantic Masher, so when it's placed on rearguard by the ability of your Vanguard with Rezael, it gets plus 15k, so it's just a 28/38k beater. The other main grade 3 option most people go for is Sages, so this is the card from Festival Collection. They all have the same standard ability. When your opponent's drive check reveals a trigger this turn, it gets 10k power and shield. When it attacks, you can look at the top card of your deck, put it on top or bottom, put it on the top of the deck or in your soul. Then you can counterblast one, and choose one of your opponent's Vanguard with 14,000 or more power, and increase this unit's power by that power. And then you can remove an overtrigger to choose one of your other front rows to give it plus 15k. I'm gonna be honest, like, the more I play with Sages, the more I think this card is actually a bit of a noob trap. So, the thing that makes this card attractive is that first ability, right? Like, if you have the 14,000 or more power, then you can, like, increase it by that amount. So, theoretically, what happens is your opponent checks a damage trigger, he gains 10k from the continuous effect to become 20/33, and then you can counterblast one and increase it even further by another, like, 23, let's say. and so that becomes 40/56 just by itself, and that's really big. And of course, if your opponent happens to check an over trigger instead of just like outright ending the turn, like Psyjust can just copy the over trigger and kind of negate it. So it is like a very powerful card when it comes up. The problem is, like, every time I've played the card, it just feels like the conditions aren't there. Like, you don't need the soul charge that badly. Like, there have been times where I've run out of soul, and I have, like, used the soul charge, but, like, not that big a deal. And, like, every time I see this card, it just... I wish I had Gigantic Crusher or Gigantic Masher instead. Like, just the fixed plus 15k would have been nice instead of, like, a Psyjust that wasn't live. And also, like, I had one game where I played against a Rezael where my opponent kept soul charging with Psyjust to try and, like, dig for triggers and ended up decking out because of it. So, yeah, just every time I see this card, I feel like it's not actually doing anything, and if anything is, like, an active detriment to the person playing it. So, it's here because, like, everyone just seems to keep putting it in their deck for some reason, but, like, realistically, I don't think this card is actually very good. And also, it is stupidly expensive for no reason. So, yeah, really just no reason to be playing this card. Next up, we have a new Grade 2 unit, Knight of Bowstreak's Nibiris. So this just came out in set 2, and is kind of why I was holding off a bit. So when it's placed on Rearguard Circle by your Grade 3 or greater Vanguard's ability, it gets 10k. And then at the end of the battle attacks, if you have a Grade 3 or greater Rezael in its card name, you can Energy Blast 3, put it into your soul, draw a card, then look at the top card of your deck and put it on top or bottom. So another reason not to play Psyjust. This also just stacks the deck. It doesn't soul charge like Psyjust can, but, like, that's not super duper important. Actually, no, it does soul charge. It puts itself into soul, so, like, yeah, there's actually no reason to be playing Psyjust anymore. This card is like $8 compared to the $40 that Psyjust is. So you have a card that, like, more consistently gains power, has similar utility of, like, getting you soul and letting you look at your top deck. So just play this instead of a card that costs 5 times as much and probably does 5 times less the average game. Next up, Divine Sister Biscotti. So this is one of the 2 options you have for a Cycler card. So when it's put to Guard Circle from your hand or discarded for your Ride deck, you can Counterblast 1 or Energy Blast 3 to draw a card. And then when you call it, if you Persona Road, you can Counterblast or Energy Blast. Look at the top 3 cards, choose up to 1 card from among them, put it on top of your deck, put the rest at the bottom. If it's not during the battle phase, you can call it to Rearguard Circle instead of putting it on top. So, obviously, the deck doesn't really use energy that much. Like, now, with Nibiris, you do have a new outlet for energy, but it's still not a resource you're going to be using a ton of, so having Biscotti early is very nice, just to, like, recoup your advantage from discarding. And, you know, there are times where you might need to use the call ability. The current meta does actually have a lot of removal between Varga and Blangdmeyer now. And then, of course, your other option is Spiral Cutie Angel. So when it's discarded during the Ride phase, you can Soul Blast, put it on the bottom of your deck to draw a card. Again, you're not Soul Blasting a ton. You do need it for Nobia, which we'll talk about in a sec, but it's not the most important thing. Like, you can probably afford a Soul Blast somewhere. And then the other ability is, like, if you Persona Road, you can Counterblast 1, look at the top 2 cards, add 1 to hand, put the rest on top or bottom. So I actually like the on-play ability of Spiral Cutie Angel more than Biscotti. It's just that, like, energy is a bit freer for the deck, so Biscotti kind of ends up being the better option. But unfortunately, the card is also $30, so yeah. Next up, like we mentioned, is Nobia. So when it's placed, if you have a Grade 3 or greater with Rezael, you can Counterblast 1, look at the top 3 cards, choose up to 1 Grade 3 or less, call it to Rearguard Circle, put the rest on the bottom. If it's during your battle phase, you put it into your hand instead of calling it. And then when it attacks a grade 3 or greater unit, if you have a grade 3 or greater with Rezael, then you can Soul Blast 1, and it gets power plus 10,000. So this is like generally just a pretty good card. It gets you a little bit of card advantage, being able to like search and call something. It can also give you, or it also becomes a 20k beater with the Soul Blasting ability. And you do Soul Blast a little bit for other things, which we'll talk about, but like this will probably be your main outlet for Soul by the late game, which... Next up, we have Resurgent Dragon. So this is scraping the bottom of the barrel budget card. So when it's placed on Rearguard Circle, if your Vanguard is a grade 3 or greater, when it's placed on Rearguard Circle from Drop Zone, and your Vanguard's grade 3 or greater, it just gets 10k. So just kind of like a worse version of this. It's a version of this that like is more specific, that has to be placed from the Drop Zone instead of just by any ability. And also doesn't have any kind of like secondary ability. So this is really just like super, super budget, like you really can't afford anything else. Maple is something I've like thought about, so because Nibiris puts itself into Soul, if you're in a position where you call it off of Rezael's ability, like you could be in a position where you just have an open circle that needs to be filled next turn, and depending on how things go with how aggressive decks can be in this meta, you know, you could just be in a position where you can't easily fill the slot. And so like a copy of Maple as just like a tech card where you can maybe bring it back in some scenarios, and then you'll just like call over it with Rezael afterwards, is not horrible. Next up is Cadwalla. So, at the end of the battle, it attacks a Vanguard. If you have 4 or more units, you can Soul Blast 1, retire him, look at the top 3 cards, add a grade 2 or greater unit from among them, and then shuffle. If you didn't reveal a card, draw a card. So, I was playing this for set 1. I think set 2, it does get replaced by Nibiris, but the thing that was nice about Cadwalla is that it could just, like, get itself out of the way, you know, and get you a little bit of advantage. Then when you called something over with Rezael, like that circle is already open because it retired itself. It also works in the early game, so if you just open like the God Hand where you can super rush down your opponent, it's a way for you to just like aggro a bunch, and then it goes away so they can't damage deny you, and that's pretty good. So, also, this card is cheap. It's like less than $10. So, budget players, rejoice. Next up, Carabra. So, a generic Keter card from set 6. When it's placed on Rearguard Circle, you can Counterblast, Soul Blast, look at the top 3 cards, choose a card from among them, call it if it's grade 2 or less, or put it in your hand if it isn't, and then shuffle. So, with Carabra, there's this, like, an interesting little thing where, one, it is cheap, so it can be a budget option. Let me see if yeah, so it is around $10, a little bit more or less, kind of depending on what vendor you look at. So, for people who can't afford the package, which we will get to, Carabra is like a cheaper way to just kind of like build a board early. Also, this is from set 8, not set 6. I'm looking at the wrong thing. This is Special Series 6, which was the Graham Grace deck set. So, yeah, it was originally from set 8. But I digress. This card is kind of like a budget way of like gaining advantage early. Like it can call a card and then you can kind of aggro with it. So it's okay. It's not amazing. The other use case for this is like, because Rezael has to call different grades and it's also dependent on how much damage you have, you could be in a position where you're at like 2 or 3 damage and it's like, okay, well, I have to call like only a 2 or like a 2 and a 1. And so what you can do is like you can make a column with Carabra, and then Carabra can like look at the top deck and call something else, and you can still kind of aggro your opponent with 5 attacks while playing within the bounds of Rezael. So, you know, that is like a use case for this card. Next up, the card that everybody loves / hates, Forefront 9 Taith Fault. So, when it's placed on rear other than by a unit card's ability, if you played a normal order, you Soul Blast 1, look at the top 5 cards of your deck, choose one card with grade less than or equal to your Vanguard, reveal it, call it to rear if it is a unit card, or put it into your hand if it's a normal order. And then when it attacks a grade 3 or greater, if you have 4 or more units, this gets power plus 10,000. So this is a part of the Keter package alongside Sergauon and the Order, which we will get to. So obviously, the Order, if you know, lets you like draw 2, call 2 that are like grade less than or equal to your Vanguard. So what you do is you like call the Taefalth, and then that'll let you Soul Blast, and you can call another thing, and you're just accruing all this insane advantage. It's also just a 20k beater with very easy conditions of having a full board. Like, that's pretty doable, especially because Rezael is able to, like, revive things from the drop zone. It's just a really good card all around. And I don't have it pulled up, but if we go on TCG Player, this card is like $30-$40. It's also, like, barely available. You know, I was lucky I bought into a case of set 11 just because, like, I got it in my head I wanted to play all of the, like, Craycross decks, so I just had my playset already. But, like, yeah, this card is very, very strong and very, very expensive. We already talked about Spiral Cutie Angel. This is another Cope budget card, so when it's placed on rear by a card's ability, it gets 5k, and then if it was placed from deck, you can Soul Blast 1 to draw a card, and it gets boost. So the second ability doesn't matter, you'll never call it from deck. I just put it in here because it gains 5k power, so once again, if you just like cannot afford anything and you're scraping the bottom of the barrel for playable cards, this technically does it. Next up, Obligator Dragon. So this is a new generic double R from the latest set. So when it's placed on rear from hand, if you do not play any orders this turn, you can discard a card, search your deck for up to 1 card without Regalis Piece, discard it, and it gets the ability that you can play it from the drop zone, and when you play it from the drop zone, after being played, it goes to the bottom of your deck instead, and then you shuffle. So this is just like a way to search out your orders. Like, I've seen a couple people in Japan teching in just like a copy, essentially just being like the 5th copy of whatever your order of choice is, which is fine. Next is Gragaon. So this is something that was just added in set 2. It's a rare. So when your unit was placed by the ability of a Vanguard with Divine Skill, it gets the ability that you can retire it to countercharge after it boosts, and power plus 5,000. So this is like a 13k beater. It has a bit of utility in countercharging, which you do have in other units, but just like if you're looking for another source of countercharge for whatever reason, like you just decide to play Rezael in a way that's really counterblast heavy, this is an option you can do. And if nothing else, it's like a 13k booster that's cheap. Sergauon, so another part of the Keter package. When it boosts, if you have more rearguards than your opponent, or you played an order, it gets 5k, and then at the end of the battle, you can retire it, look at the top 2 cards, add 1 to your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your deck. So, another very powerful card. Obviously, like, the cracked opening, let's just talk about it now, is if you get Wisdom of Beginning that cleared the world, which is you counterblast 1, draw 2, choose 2 cards, either call or discard them. So, if you open the God Hand, which is like Taithfault and then Sergauon, you like draw 2, Taithfault can call another thing, and then Sergauon can search your deck even more, so you're just like accruing all of this card advantage and like digging through your deck really quickly, deck thinning, like the grade 2 can call the Sergauon back. Like, there are some scenarios where it's like, okay, Sergauon like retires itself, and then let's say you're at 3 damage, you can't really afford to make the 5 attacks, you can just like call Sergauon another time, get another draw. Like, it's just crazy. This card is around like $14 to $20 depending where you look right now, so again, not the most affordable card because of how powerful it is, but if you can afford it or you just happen to already have it, then It serves a very great utility. It's being played for a reason. Next up, Aerial Sage. So this is part of the like standardized grade 1 that all of the like the faded ones have. So during battle it boosted. If you have a grade 3 or greater with Rezael in its card name, it gets 5k. And then if you boost the Rezael, you can discard a card to countercharge and get power plus 2000. So kind of the reason why Gragaon is not a definitive option is because you do just have countercharging off of Aerial Sage. The discard cost can be a little heavy, but like you can burn through it at a decent pace if you're going like, okay, well, Rezael counterblast, and oh, I used Nopia skill, that's a counterblast, and I resolved a wisdom earlier in the game, that's a counterblast. Like, you could end up in a position where you need it. If you fall for the noob trap and play Psyjoss, maybe you want that power boost, maybe it actually came up for you. So yeah, like, very useful card, nice to have, like, 3 or 4 of it. And then finally, Gaon, so this is like the generic grade 1 that's just like plus 5k power and shield. Once again, this is a like scraping the bottom of the barrel budget option. It's not terrible. The extra 5k shield is nice to have. We also have the Jeweled Beast Topaz, so this is something you can just play like 1 or maybe 2 of if you can find the space. Mostly for the like 15k shield, but like maybe the ability to like search your deck for something might come up. Again, there is a lot of removal in the format, so it's not the worst thing in the world to just be able to like call something. And then Painkiller Angel, the original Sergaon. At the end of the battle, it boosted, you can Soul Blast 1, retire it to draw a card. You don't get the like definitive searching the way Sergaon does. It does also cost you a soul, which can kind of hurt. It doesn't get the power boost. It is just worse in every way, but the card is also like $3. Yeah, so if you can't afford the like 14 for Sergaon, then Painkiller Angel's got you. And for orders, a Warrior's Rest is something that I've like considered. The awkward thing is it doesn't work very well with Taith Fault, because like it has to activate when it's played, and what this card does is like you choose 2 of your units and they get the continuous ability. Like during the battle that they are boosted, they get an additional 10k, and then if you have 5 or more units, you draw a card. So that's the thing, is like you have to choose the units. Those units specifically have to be boosted, so you can't just like put it on a back row. And so if you like call the Taith Fault and then you use this, then you can't get the call ability. And if you call this with like Taith Fault already on the, or if you try to use this when Taith Fault isn't on the field, it's like you can't choose her to gain the power anymore, and you have to kind of like arrange your board in a way to be able to like get the benefit of the boosting. And then at that point you probably like already have the board, so do you even need Taith Fault? So it's just like very awkward with her. So yeah, that's kind of all of the options that off the top of my head are like viable-ish. Like they all have like their own justifications. I don't know if there are like any other ones that I missed. If there are, let me know down in the comments, but let's quickly go over just like some quick sample deck lists while we're here. I can close all the TCG player tabs now that I've talked about prices. So this is more or less the list that I was planning to run. So, you know, we have our Persona rides, we have the 2 Gigantech Mashers. I keep wanting to call it Gigantech Crusher for some reason. So, like I said, like every time I saw Psyjoss, I just wish it was this instead. Like the consistent 20/38k is just better than the off chance that Psyjoss manages to do its thing. Only playing 2 of Nibiris, so the awkward thing about this card is it has to be placed by ability to get the 10k, whereas like Nobia and Taith Fault can just have the power already. So you can potentially attack with them like unboosted and then call your columns later and like retain the boost so you can really get some good numbers going. It's basically taking the place of Cadwalla. My old list was more or less identical to this one, except I was playing 2 Cadwallas over Nibiris. I think like Nibiris having the potential to gain 10,000 power over Cadwalla being kind of vanilla is nice. The main thing Cadwalla has in his favor is just you can use it early game. So yeah. Like, otherwise, I think this card is, like, mostly better. Anyways, 4 Biscotti, only 3 Nobia. It's not the most essential card, and we needed to, like, make space for a few of the other tech cards. 4 Taithvault, 4 Sergauon, 4 Wisdom. You know, we're just running max copies of the package. I can't really justify to myself running less than that just because, like, seeing any combination of these 3 is so paramount to getting an early advantage. Like, you really want to see Wisdom, you really want to see Sergauon. You can maybe run fewer copies of, like, Tailfaith if that Taithvault if you really wanted to. Like, you could maybe run 3 if you wanted to tech in a copy of the Jewel Beast. You know, 4 of Aerial Sage, I'm considering just dropping it to 3 so I can fit in a copy of the Jewel Beast. I'll see. And then PGs, just PGs, 1 copy of Sanctitude. Triggers, we're running 8 crits because Rezael puts them back. 3 front because you actually do have a decent amount of draw power between, like, Wisdom, Nobia, Taithvault can, like, call a card. This draws you a card. Biscotti can potentially, like, call something. You just have, like, so many ways of accruing advantage that you don't need the draw trigger, so the extra shield value and the extra power are both really nice. And now that we have Blankmeyer and Zorga in the meta, like, I think it is grounds to justify running both. Like, both of the decks happen to play into both types of triggers. So, like, Blankmeyer, the grade 1, can restand something, that triggers the restanding one. Zorga can also trigger it off of the Divine skill, where it restands a column. And then, of course, both decks also gain crits, so that also justifies having this. And of course, with the restanding one, it also has uses against, like, Varga, which restands, Shiranui has restanders. Like, I think now is just a pretty good time to have the effect heals. Obviously, if you're on a budget and you can't afford any of the, like, effect triggers, you can just run the vanilla versions. I'm personally choosing to run the red OT. Like, it is something where, like, because you're going to be calling things back from the drop zone, it's very easy to just give the restanding ability. You know, Rezael doesn't really have any kind of, like, guard restrict or anything that makes the blue OT that gives you a crit just a really, like, killer move. So being able to just restand with 100 million twice, I feel like is more impactful for this deck particularly. And of course, if you check it early, it is also just another way to get an extra attack. Like, I think you can justify running any of the OTs, I just happen to like the red one personally. Next up, we have kind of the mid-budget option, so this version kind of assumes that you don't have $30 to drop on Taithvault, and also you don't have, like, 15 to 20 on the Sergauons, so we replaced it with Painkiller Angel, which is objectively worse, but what are you going to do? And then Carbra, like I said, can sort of fill a similar role where you can counterblast Soul Blast to, like, call something, so you're still kind of getting a bit of early advantage. You can still kind of rush early with it. There's that, like, niche utility where you can, like, maybe make 5 attacks in a position where it otherwise isn't feasible. It's okay. And then we replaced the Wisdom with a Warrior's Rest, just because, like, now this version of the deck is playing a bunch of cards that don't gain a bunch of power immediately, so, like, Carbra doesn't gain many power for himself, doesn't gain any power on the thing you're calling either, so, like, Warrior's Rest is a lot more useful now, just to, like, pump the numbers up a little bit, because, like, both Gigantech Masher and Nibiris both need to be placed by an ability, so if they're just kind of sitting there because that's all you have, then, like, Warrior's Rest can help to prop them up, and then for the, like, remaining deck space, I just put 2 of this because I wasn't entirely sure what else to put, to be perfectly honest. And then, you know, trying our best. So now we're going a lot harder into, like, Nibiris. I put Kodwalla in the deck over Carbra just because it is cheaper than Carbra. You know, like I said, like, you're always going to have to spend at least a little bit of money, and if you're really truly scraping the bottom of the barrel, then Resurgent Dragon is there for you. So, yeah. That's going to be it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was helpful for you. What has your experience with Rezael been? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching, everybody. Bye-bye.